Welcome to the Finance Lecture. How does a country produce more billion-dollar companies in a single year than France, while almost 40% of its children remain stunted from malnutrition before they reach the age of 5? Both of those numbers are current. Both of them describe the same country. Both of them describe right now. That is not a contradiction. That is the operating system. I want you to sit with that for a second, because most of what you've been told about India, most of what you read in the financial press, most of what shows up in those breathless Goldman reports about the Asian century, almost all of it is built on a category error. Stop me if this gets uncomfortable. The category error is that India is a country. It isn't. India is a federation of nations wearing a single passport. And the moment you understand that, really understand it in the way that a person who has actually allocated capital across Indian states understands it, the entire story flips. Everything you thought was a paradox becomes a structure. Everything you thought was a contradiction becomes a feature. Let me give you a number. Tamil Nadu, roughly 75 million people on the southeastern coast. Tamil Nadu's per-person economic output is around $6,000 a year. That puts it somewhere in the neighborhood of Portugal in the late 90s. Now, take Bihar, roughly 120 million people in the northeast. Bihar's per-person economic output is, give or take, around $800 a year. That puts Bihar somewhere below Rwanda, below most of sub-Saharan Africa. Same country, same currency, same passport, same 5-year plans coming out of Delhi. And when you average them together, you get a number that describes neither of them. The aggregate hides everything that actually matters. I had a conversation, this must have been 2017, 2018, in a hotel lobby in Singapore, one of those long bars where nothing important is supposed to happen, with the chief executive of an Indian conglomerate. Real one, I won't name him. He said something to me that I have not been able to stop thinking about in 7 years. He said, look, we don't really compete with America. We don't compete with China. We compete with the next Indian state over. Our biggest competitor is whoever runs Telangana, or Karnataka, or sometimes Maharashtra, depending on the year. That's what he said. And what he meant, what I think he meant, is that the actual unit of analysis for understanding the Indian economy is not India, it's the state. So, here is what I want you to walk away from this lecture knowing. I want you to leave with a working model of the country that finance professionals at the upper end of the institutional spectrum actually use. Not the World Bank model, not the McKinsey model, the model that the people running emerging markets desks at the real shops use when they're allocating capital and they don't have to write up a public-facing memo about it. That model is not in any textbook. It is not in any of the standard Indian economy courses. It lives in the hallway conversations, in the back rooms, in the after-hours dinners in Mumbai and Singapore and Dubai. And I am going to walk you through it. We are going to look at why the demographic dividend, the thing every Western analyst is excited about, may have already been wasted, and the window is closing in real time, and most people in this room have not absorbed that yet. We are going to look at why India's manufacturing share of the economy has actually declined since the 1991 liberalization, which is the opposite of what every developing economy is supposed to do, and which the economist Danny Roderick has a name for. We are going to look at the endogamous capital networks, the Marwaris, the Gujaratis, the Sindhis, that captured the post-liberalization economy in ways that the official story does not acknowledge. We are going to look at the India stack. We are going to look at the water collapse. We are going to look at Adani. We are going to look at why I think the most likely outcome for the country over the next 25 years is something almost no one is forecasting publicly. Some of you in this room are going to make a lot of money on what I'm about to say. Some of you are going to lose a lot. The difference is going to come down to whether you walk out of here thinking of India as a country or thinking of India as a stack of countries operating at different resolutions with different incentives, different demographic curves, different political economies, all wearing the same name. One more thing before we go in. The thing about India, actually, let me back up. The thing about most developing economies, when you read about them, is that the people writing the reports have not actually been there, or they've been there for a week in a 5-star hotel with a driver in 2 cities. India is not that kind of country. India is the kind of country where the city you fly into determines everything you will see, and the city you fly into is almost never representative of the country at large. You land in Mumbai or Bangalore, you think you understand India. You don't. You understand a slice. The slice is real. It's just not the whole thing. And the whole thing is what we're going to try to map today. The map is going to feel uncomfortable. Some of it is going to sound, frankly, almost insulting to people who care about India. And I want to say, before we go any further, that I am not in the business of running down a country that I think is one of the more genuinely interesting civilizational experiments alive on this planet. I love this country. I've spent a lot of time there. The reason I am willing to say what I'm about to say is because I think the affection most Western analysts have for India is shallow, and the affection some Indians have for the official narrative is dangerous. And the only way to actually engage with what is happening there is to look directly at the parts of it that the official story does not want you to look at. So, let's look. You have probably heard this story before in some form. It goes like this. India is the world's largest democracy. India is the world's fastest growing major economy. India has a demographic dividend, a population that is young and getting younger while the rest of the world ages. India will, by 2050 or thereabouts, be one of the 3 largest economies on Earth, sitting alongside the United States and China. Every line of that is technically defensible. Every line of that is also, in a way that matters, wrong. Let me take them one at a time. Fastest growing major economy? Sure. India grew at something like 7% last year. That is real. But look at where the growth is coming from. The growth is concentrated in services. It is concentrated geographically in about 5 states. It is concentrated in about 15% of the population. The other 85% of the population is, in measurable terms, not participating in the growth in any meaningful way. Their wages have not moved in real terms in over a decade. The growth is real, and the growth is also a thin top layer on a structure that is not moving. And then there is the manufacturing problem. This one I want to spend some time on because it is the single most under-discussed structural fact about the Indian economy, and I have not heard a public commentator outside of about 4 academic specialists discuss it correctly. Here's the fact. India's manufacturing share of gross domestic product has declined since the 1991 liberalization. That is the opposite of what is supposed to happen. Every developing economy that has industrialized, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, China, has gone through a period where manufacturing grew as a share of the economy, peaked at somewhere between 30 and 40%, and then declined as the economy moved to services. India skipped the middle step. India went from agriculture directly to services without building the manufacturing middle layer in between. The economist Danny Roderick calls this premature deindustrialization. It is not a small problem. It is the single largest structural reason India is not going to follow the East Asian model, and almost no one writing the optimistic India reports has reckoned with it. So what does that actually mean? It means that the jobs that absorbed hundreds of millions of Chinese workers as they came off the farms into the cities, the textile mills, the assembly lines, the export factories, those jobs do not exist in India at anything like the scale they did in China. And without that absorption mechanism, the demographic dividend has nowhere to land. You can have a young population. If you do not have jobs for them, all you have is a young, unemployed, and increasingly angry population, which is, I would argue, a fair description of the current political moment in much of North India. I want to give you a second example. The Bangalore water collapse. Bangalore, or Bengaluru, as it is properly called now, is the capital of India's information technology industry. It is the city where most of the global tech companies have their India offices. It is the place that absorbs most of the foreign investment into Indian technology. And right now, as we speak, Bangalore is rationing water. I'm not exaggerating. There are residential districts in Bangalore where the municipal water supply runs for 2 hours a day. There are buildings that depend on tanker trucks delivering water from sources outside the city. The groundwater table in Bangalore has dropped roughly 300 meters over the last 40 years. 300 meters. That is not a slow decline. That is a collapse. And here is the part that I find genuinely difficult to communicate to Western audiences. The state government of Karnataka, which contains Bangalore, is continuing to approve new data center construction. They are approving new technology parks. They are doing this even as the underlying water resource that the city depends on is in measurable, documented, government-acknowledged failure. The reason they are doing it is because the political cost of not approving the projects is higher than the political cost of the water collapse, because the water collapse can be papered over for another 5 or 10 years with infrastructure spending and tanker imports and lawsuits between states. The water collapse is a future problem. The tax revenue from the new data centers is a present problem. Okay, stay with me. There is one more piece of this I want to give you because it underlies everything else. The calorie problem. This is a piece of work by the economist Angus Deaton, and separately by Jean Drèze, that has not penetrated the public conversation about India at all, and I find that almost unaccountable. Their finding, and I want to state it carefully because it is counterintuitive, is that per-person calorie consumption in India has, on average, declined since the 1990s. Even as the economy has grown, even as poverty has, by some measures, fallen, even as the country has gotten richer, per-person calorie intake has gone down. Why? This is what Deaton and Drèze were trying to explain. The answer, more or less, is that as Indians have moved out of subsistence agriculture, the calorie requirements of their daily work have fallen. A field laborer needs 3,000 calories. A software engineer in Bangalore needs around 2,000. And so the body's demand for food has dropped, and the actual intake has tracked that drop. The problem is, and this is where it gets uncomfortable, the children of those people are still showing up undernourished. Stunting rates in India remain among the highest in the world. India has more stunted children than sub-Saharan Africa, even though it is significantly richer. That is not a paradox. That is the same operating system I started with. The averages have improved, the bottom 40% of the distribution has not, and the demographic dividend is concentrated in the bottom 40%. So, the conventional story is that India is rising, the demographic dividend is the wind at its back, and the only question is how high it goes. The actual story is that the wind is blowing through a sail that is full of holes, the growth is real, the base it is built on is not what people think it is, and the window, the actual demographic window, is closing in real time. Because by the time India's working age population peaks around 2047, the global economy is going to look very different than the one that absorbed China's working age population in 1990. That is not a forecast, that is just arithmetic. Now, let's go back further. Because to understand why all of this is happening, you have to understand how India actually came together, and how the story we tell about that coming together is, in important ways, a fiction. 1991, balance of payments crisis. India is, in measurable terms, about 3 weeks away from defaulting on its foreign debt. The country has roughly enough foreign exchange reserves to cover 2 weeks of imports. The government, under Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao, with Manmohan Singh as finance minister, flies physical gold to London as collateral against an emergency loan from the International Monetary Fund. That actually happened. The country airlifted gold out of the central bank in secret to keep the lights on. And out of that crisis came what is now called the 1991 liberalization, the opening up of the Indian economy, the end of the license Raj. That is the story you have heard. The story is roughly true. What is missing from the story is who, specifically, ended up owning the new economy. So here's what I want to tell you. The 1991 liberalization did not open India to the world in the way that the textbook account suggests. What it did was open a series of specific channels through which existing endogamous capital networks that had been operating in the Indian economy for, in some cases, 300 or 400 years, captured the new opportunities at scale. And those networks are not the kinds of networks you can join. You have to be born into them, or you have to marry into them, and nobody who isn't already in them is going to marry you in. Let me name names. The Marwaris, a trading and banking community originally from the Marwar region of Rajasthan in the northwest of India. The Marwaris have dominated Indian commercial finance since the 18th century. The Birlas, the Mittals, the Goenkas, the Bajajs. If you go through the largest industrial houses in India that are not the Tatas or the Ambanis, an overwhelming majority of them trace back to about a dozen Marwari families operating out of about 3 districts in Rajasthan. They marry within the community, they lend to each other, they hire each other's sons, and they have, very quietly, captured an enormous share of the post-liberalization Indian economy. The Gujaratis are a parallel story. Gujarat is a state on India's western coast. The Gujarati trading community has been operating across the Indian Ocean, from East Africa to Southeast Asia, for at least 700 years. The Ambanis are Gujarati, the Adanis are Gujarati, the Prime Minister of India is Gujarati. Not coincidentally, the most politically connected industrial houses in India are, with very few exceptions, Gujarati. And then there's the Patel motel phenomenon. This is one of those things that I think is so strange that most American audiences refuse to believe it when they first hear it, but it is documented and the numbers are public. Roughly 60%, give or take, somewhere between 50 and 70%, depending on which year's survey you look at, of all economy motels in the United States are owned by people with the surname Patel. The Patels are a specific community from a specific cluster of villages in the Charatar region of central Gujarat. They came to the United States in waves, starting in the 1940s, and through endogamous lending circles, intra-community marriage, and an extremely tight kinship economy, they captured the American budget motel industry, not by competing on price, by eliminating outside competition through pooled capital that operated entirely within the community. There is no MBA program that teaches you how to compete with the Patels in the motel business, because there is no model. The model is being a Patel. So why am I telling you this? I am telling you this because what happened in 1991 was not the end of the license Raj. It was the privatization of the license Raj. The licenses, the permits, the connections, the access to capital, those things did not disappear. They moved from the bureaucracy into the hands of the families that had been operating around the bureaucracy for generations. The same families that paid the bribes during the license Raj became the families that got the contracts after the license Raj. And because Indian commercial law makes it extremely difficult to enforce contracts against entities that don't already trust you, the families that already had each other's trust ended up with the running of the new economy. Now, there is an aside I want to take here. Caste. Because none of this makes any sense if you don't understand how caste actually operates in the modern Indian economy, and most Western analysts get this wrong in a very specific way. The Western story is that caste is a religious or cultural phenomenon, a vestige of an older India that is fading as the country modernizes. That story is wrong. Caste in modern India is not a religious phenomenon. It is an economic phenomenon. It is the operating layer beneath the capital networks I just described. It is digitizing rather than dying. The matrimonial websites that the Indian middle class uses to arrange marriages have caste filters built into the search interface. You can filter by caste, by subcaste, by region, by the specific gotra, the lineage group. The system is more granular online than it ever was offline because the search algorithms allow a precision that village matchmaking never could. The Indian Institutes of Technology, the IITs, which are the most prestigious technical universities in India, are de facto upper caste reproduction systems. Look at the entrance exam, the JEE. The entrance exam is supposedly meritocratic. The students who pass it are overwhelmingly from a narrow set of upper caste communities who have access to the coaching industry that prepares for the exam. That coaching industry is concentrated in about 3 or 4 cities. Kota in Rajasthan is the most famous. And the families that can afford to send their children to Kota for 2 years of full-time exam preparation are, with very few exceptions, from a specific economic and caste stratum. The merit narrative is the caste narrative. They are the same thing, dressed differently. The reservation system, the quotas for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes that take up something like 50% of government jobs and educational seats, was designed to break the caste economic complex. It has not broken it. It has in some ways hardened it. Because the categories themselves get reinforced every time a quota is enforced, you cannot dissolve the categories by paying tribute to them. That is a tension at the heart of Indian governance that the country has not resolved, and, I would argue, may not be able to resolve within any time frame that matters for the next 2 or 3 decades of development. That's the historical layer. The country did not liberalize so much as it transferred control from one set of insiders to another set of insiders, the 2 sets being highly overlapping. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something, probably an emerging markets fund. Now, let me show you something that almost everyone who is bearish on India has missed. Because I have just spent 20 minutes telling you why the conventional optimistic story is wrong, and you would be forgiven for walking away thinking I think India is a basket case. I do not think India is a basket case. I think India is doing something at the state level that no other country has done, and that the bearish story misses, in the same way that the bullish story misses the things I just told you. The thing it is doing is called India Stack, and I want to walk you through it because it is, I am about to say something I do not say often, it is genuinely the most advanced piece of digital public infrastructure that exists anywhere in the world right now, including in the countries that talk about digital infrastructure the most. India Stack is the layered system of digital identity, digital payments, and digital data exchange that the Indian government has built over the last 12 or 13 years, starting roughly in 2010. The foundation layer is called Aadhaar. Aadhaar is a biometric identification system that has issued unique identity numbers to roughly 1.25 billion people. Fingerprints, iris scans, the whole thing. It is the largest biometric database that has ever existed in human history, and the Indian government built it in about a decade on a budget that would not pay for a single American defense contract. On top of Aadhaar sits the second layer, the Unified Payments Interface, UPI for short. UPI is a real-time payment system that lets any 2 people in India send money to each other instantly using a phone number or a virtual address for free. Free. No transaction fee, no interchange, no card network taking a cut. And it works. As of last year, UPI processed something on the order of 12 billion transactions per month. 12 billion per month? That is more than Visa and MasterCard combined for transactions originating in India by a wide margin. The American payments industry has been trying to figure out how to do something like UPI for 15 years and has not been able to do it because the American payments industry is structured around private rails that extract rents on every transaction, and removing the rents would destroy the business. The Indian government just built the rails as public infrastructure and let private companies compete on the application layer above it. That is, and I want to be careful here because I'm about to praise a piece of state-built infrastructure, which is not something I do casually, that is a genuine institutional innovation. The third layer is data exchange, account aggregator framework, digital health records, the DigiLocker, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, which is an attempt to build a public alternative to the closed marketplace model that Amazon and Flipkart run on. Some of these are working, some of them are not yet working. The point is that the country has, at the state level, built a stack of public APIs that private companies can build on top of, and the result is something that looks like, well, it looks like what the internet was supposed to be before Facebook and Amazon and Google captured most of the value at the platform layer. I want to give you a specific example because I think the abstract description does not land. The Geo shock, 1996, Mukesh Ambani, head of Reliance Industries, son of the founder, the wealthiest man in India by a considerable margin. Sorry, 2016. 2016. I keep wanting to say 1996 because the launch felt that consequential. 2016, Mukesh Ambani launches Reliance Jio, a fourth-generation mobile network, and he prices the data at zero, free voice calls, effectively free data, and the data is delivered at speeds that, at the time, were faster than what most Indians had been getting on broadband. The price of mobile data in India dropped by something like 95% in 18 months, from around $4 a gigabyte to roughly 17 cents. India went from being one of the data scarcest large countries on Earth to being the data cheapest large country on Earth in less than 2 years. That was not just business strategy. That was, and I think this is the part that gets missed in the Western coverage of it, that was industrial coordination at a scale that almost no other country has been able to execute. The state-built India stack only mattered because there was a private actor willing to crater the price of the underlying connectivity to make the stack accessible. And the private actor was willing to do it because the political and regulatory environment allowed it to consolidate the market on the way through. You will not find a textbook in which that kind of state-private coordination is presented as a model because the dominant theory of development does not have a vocabulary for it. But it is what happened. Now here is the part that I want you to hold in your mind because this is the tension that defines the next decade of Indian development. The digital infrastructure layer is among the best in the world. The physical infrastructure layer is collapsing. Delhi's air quality on a bad day in November hits 25 to 40 times the World Health Organization's safe limit. People in this room would not be able to breathe outside in Delhi in November without specialized equipment. Children in Delhi are showing measurable lung capacity decrements by the time they are 10 years old. The schools close, flights divert. And it happens every year, and the government cannot fix it because the air pollution is a function of agricultural burning in 2 neighboring states whose politics do not align with the central government's politics. And the coordination problem is, frankly, unsolvable inside the current political structure. The water problem I already mentioned. 21 major Indian cities are forecast to run out of usable groundwater within the next 10 to 15 years, according to a report from the Indian government's own policy think tank, Niti Aayog. That is not an environmentalist's projection. That is the government's own forecast. So this is the 2 India problem, digital sovereignty on top of physical collapse. A country that can move money in real time across the entire population, and a country in which 50% of the population is going to face acute water stress within 15 years. Both true. Same country, same decade. And I will tell you, this is just me speculating, but I have skin in this view. I think the digital layer is, in some sense, a hedge against the physical layer. I think the Indian state has, at some level, recognized that it cannot solve the physical infrastructure problems in the time window available, and it has invested in building a digital layer that allows the population to extract economic value despite the failing physical substrate. That is, if that is what is happening, that is one of the most quietly radical theories of development that has been attempted in the last 50 years, and nobody is writing about it that way. Anyway, let's go one layer deeper. Okay, so I have given you the surface mechanism, India stack on top of physical collapse. State-built rails, private execution, 2-track development. That is the layer that you can read about if you read the right people. There is one more layer underneath that. And this is the part that I do not generally discuss in public, and I'm going to do it here because, look, in this room with the people who are watching this, I think you are old enough to handle it. The political economy of modern India is state capitalism with Indian characteristics. And the characteristic that makes it different from Chinese state capitalism, which is the model people reach for when they try to make sense of what is happening, is that the relationship between the state and the largest private actors runs in the opposite direction. In China, the Communist Party can discipline the oligarchs. Jack Ma made one speech in 2020 that the party did not like, and Jack Ma effectively disappeared from public life for 2 years. The Chinese state holds the leverage. It can break any private fortune at any time, and the oligarchs know it. In India, the arrow points the other way. The largest private fortunes in India co-finance the political parties. The political parties, and I include all the major ones in this, not just one, depend on the private fortunes for the cash that runs election campaigns. And so the discipline runs in the opposite direction. The political party cannot move against the largest private actors, because the largest private actors are how the political party stays in power. I am not naming names here, although you can probably guess who I'm talking about. The 2 largest private fortunes in India are linked in ways that are visible in the public market data to the political fortunes of the ruling party. The stock prices of those 2 groups have moved in ways that, in a developed market, would attract regulatory attention. The Hindenburg report on the Adani Group, published in January of 2023, alleged a list of accounting and ownership irregularities that, in a country with an independent securities regulator, would have triggered a formal investigation. The Securities and Exchange Board of India did open an investigation. The investigation is still ongoing, or it was, the last I checked, and the Adani Group's market capitalization has, in net terms, recovered most of what it lost in the immediate aftermath. I'm not telling you the Adani Group is corrupt. I'm telling you that the Indian regulatory state is structurally incapable of acting against actors at that level, because the actors at that level finance the political system that controls the regulatory state. That is the structural fact. The names rotate. The structure is fixed. There is a second piece of this that almost nobody discusses: the diaspora as state policy. India has, over the last 40 or 50 years, built an educational system whose top tier is, in effective terms, an export pipeline. The IITs that I mentioned earlier, the Indian Institutes of Management, the national medical colleges. The graduates of these institutions are not staying in India. The top quartile of every graduating class is going abroad, to the United States, to Singapore, to the United Kingdom, to Australia, to Canada. And the Indian state knows this. The Indian state has known this for decades. And the Indian state has not, in any meaningful way, tried to retain the talent. Why not? Two reasons. First, the remittances. India receives more remittances than any other country in the world. The number last year was somewhere on the order of $125 billion. That is not a small number. That is the largest single source of foreign currency entering the country, larger than software exports, larger than foreign direct investment in many years. Remittances are taxed in the source country, not the recipient country. So India gets the foreign exchange without having to provide the public services that would have come with retaining the talent at home. That is a structurally favorable trade for the Indian state. The second reason is soft power. Look at who is running American technology companies right now: Google, Microsoft, Adobe, IBM, MasterCard, Pepsi until recently, Albertsons. The chief executives of those companies were born in India, educated in the Indian elite system, and then exported. They are not Indian state actors, but they constitute a network of soft influence that the Indian state could not have built any other way. The diaspora is, in some sense, an Indian foreign policy asset that does not cost the Indian state anything to maintain, which is, I want to be careful about how I put this, which is genuinely a unique strategic position. No other country has anything like it. China has tried to build a comparable diaspora influence layer and has, more or less, failed. The Indian one happened almost accidentally as a byproduct of the educational export pipeline. Okay, so where does this leave us? Where does the country actually go from here? Here is my view. I want to be careful because this is forecasting, and forecasting is mostly a way of looking foolish 10 years later. But here's the model I work with, and you can do with it what you want. The next 25 years in India is going to be characterized by widening internal inequality alongside an increase in external strategic weight. India is going to be more powerful abroad and more unequal at home. The Hindi belt, the northern states that contain most of the political power and most of the population, is going to lag economically behind the coastal and southern states. The southern states will look, in 25 years, something like a high-end emerging market. Turkey, Mexico, maybe Poland. The northern states will look, in 25 years, something like they look now. That is a divergence of historic proportions inside a single political union, and I'm not sure the union holds in its current form. The insurance problem. I have not talked about this yet, and I am going to, because it is the thing that scares me most. Insurance penetration in India is around 3.8% for life insurance and below 1% for non-life insurance. The global average is roughly 7%. What that means in practice is that 1.4 billion people are largely uninsured against medical catastrophe. A serious illness in an Indian family is a poverty event. It is not a setback. It is a cascade. And there is no functioning market because the population that needs the insurance, most cannot afford it. And the population that can afford it has, in most cases, already secured private coverage outside the formal insurance system. The Indian state has tried to address this with the Ayushman Bharat program, a kind of national health insurance scheme. It is a real attempt. Whether it works at scale is, as far as I can tell, not yet decided. And then there is the closing window, 2047, 100 years after independence. By the most recent United Nations projections, the Indian working age population peaks somewhere around 2047 and starts declining shortly after. That is the demographic window. That is the window in which the country has to build the absorption capacity to convert the dividend into actual development. And right now, as I said at the beginning of this lecture, the curve is bending the wrong way. Manufacturing share is declining. Female labor force participation is around 24%, which is lower than every major economy in the world except Saudi Arabia. The agricultural sector still absorbs almost 40% of the workforce while producing about 16% of the output. The reallocation is not happening at the pace it needs to happen. That is the country we are looking at. A federation of nations wearing one passport, an advanced digital sovereignty layer on top of a collapsing physical substrate, a political economy in which the state cannot discipline the oligarchs, a demographic window closing in 25 years with the absorption mechanism still not built, a diaspora that is one of the most quietly powerful foreign policy assets any country has ever held, a caste economic complex that the merit narrative cannot dissolve. A water collapse the government's own think tank has warned about. A growth story that is real, on top of a base that is, let's not soften it, fragile. You walk away from this lecture and you go to a dinner party next week and someone tells you they're long India because the demographic dividend is going to drive 20 years of growth. You are going to know things that they do not know. You are going to know that the dividend has a deadline. You are going to know which states are actually doing the work. You're going to know which capital networks are extracting the upside. You're going to know that the next 25 years are not going to look like the last 25. And the last thing I want to leave you with, because this lecture is one piece of a larger map I have been drawing, and I will come back to the rest of it another time. The country we have been talking about today is one of perhaps 3 or 4 civilizational scale experiments alive on the planet right now. The other 2 or 3 are also worth looking at the same way, with the same level of granularity, with the same willingness to ignore the official story, because the official story, whichever country you pick, is almost never the story that determines what actually happens. That is the work. Some of it is in this lecture, most of it is somewhere else.